Hello everyone, this is a feature-length edition of Happy Times and Places because it's the Olympics or something. But the format is the same. I, Toby Haydock, watch a Doctor Who story, commentate along and try to guess my special guests' favourite things about each episode.
My name's Ed Stradling and I'm a factual TV producer who's done a lot of work on the DVDs of Doctor Who. Including, and this is not something I thought about, Toby, when I chose Resurrection of the Daleks, but of course I worked on the Resurrection of the Daleks DVD with you. It didn't occur to me because it wasn't a kind of making of or retrospective documentary as such about the serial that we made. It was a program about the actors, of course. We spent a few days traipsing around Chiswick and Shad Thames and the theatre in Birmingham. In the summer of 2010 for that, I can't remember what it was called. What was it called? Casting Far and Wide, I think the feature was called, that we made together. But I'd forgotten about that, actually, and it wasn't only when I was watching the episodes that, of course, it reminded me that we'd done it. So I've chosen Resurrection of the Daleks. It probably isn't one of my very favourite serials, which I think is slightly underrated in recent years. I think it was probably correctly rated in its first few years as being a very good serial, perhaps not one of the very best. That's, I think, where it belongs. In recent years, it's become a bit less popular, but it's definitely from the era which hooked me into the show. The last Davison season really was the season when I stopped just watching it and enjoying it, and if I missed an episode, who cares, really? That was the series when I mustn't miss an episode, and by the end of the series I was recording it with the intention of keeping the tape. But I've chosen it more because of a reason which I won't go into, because it gives away one of my favourite things about it, and you have to guess that as I understand it.
Well, hello everybody, and hello Ed Stradling, who I haven't seen for ages. It was lovely to hear Ed's voice. I really like Ed. He was somebody that when I lived in London I very much enjoyed socialising with. He was one of my close social circle, but neither of us are there now. He's gone back to Wales and I am back in Manchester. But yes, I would go to the theatre with Ed and with my friend Simon Harries, and they're quite a different pair, Ed and Simon, and between them made for excellent company on our theatre trips. And I was introduced to Ed by Rob Shearman, I think, originally, but I already knew his work because he'd made Putting the Shock into Earth Shock for the Doctor Who DVDs, and I'd known him from his posts on the Restoration Team website, so I knew who he was, and then I met him and then became very friendly with him, and he's a friend of mine still, but I don't see him often enough. In fact, no, wasn't the first time I met him, or the first time I spent any proper time with him, I went, it was in Bath. I went to see Steve O'Brien, and Steve, Ed and I watched some stuff on the telly at Steve's flat, actually. Maybe that was the first time I met Ed. I forget, but anyway, Steve also great company, great lad. Interesting. It was just when I was getting used to sort of being in and around London, and the fact that I could nip to Bath and I could, meet these people, because Steve's words I'd read a lot in SFX magazine before I ever met him. I still see them as the sort of cool kids of the class because, they worked on the range and in the media and all that sort of thing. And I was never, as I say, I always felt slightly distanced from, sort of people who worked in the world of Doctor Who and or science fiction, criticism, writing, program making. I was a consumer, and Ed was one of the first to employ me. It wasn't the first documentary I made, but it was the first sort of serious one, I think, for the range, Casting Far and Wide, and it was because it was about actors, and that was very much my thing. I was the actor guy then. Now I seem to be the cookbook and sad bits, dead people guy. I think I'm the cheap guy who can, do a bit to camera in one take so that we can move on and make sure this very low budget film comes in on time and on budget. I think I'm that guy. But anyway, we did Casting Far and Wide, which was actor based, because Ed said, I want to do one, because if I do a making of, you have to, you've got 6 or 7 interviews, you have to take a sentence from each interview to illustrate each point. So every section of the program, you're having to go through each interview. Whereas if you just take 5 actors and do their story from beginning to end, you just have to cut one interview and sort of as you go, really. So it's a much quicker and easier edit. So that's why he chose to do that. And we looked at who we could do. We thought we were going to get Rula Lenska, but her agent couldn't really be bothered for the amount of money that we were paying. I thought it was maybe because Rula was a bit too grand, but Rula has actually stayed in this house and did an interview for me for free. But it didn't even get to Rula. It didn't get past her agent, who couldn't really be bothered with it. I think that's what happened there. So we tried juggling with a few people. Didn't get because Rodney Bewes was still around at that point. We had everyone to choose from, apart from Maurice Colburn, of course. So it was a juggle, and we didn't know. And then eventually we got this lineup. It looked like we were going to have, very much the supporting cast. So I was very pleased when we got Del Henney, who I think is wonderful and became a friend of mine, but then gave me a great amount of guilt about how his contribution to the documentary turned out. But we'll maybe talk about that when we do it. But anyway, yes, Casting Far and Wide on the Resurrection of the Daleks special edition was a documentary right up my street, and was great to do, because Ed makes great documentaries. There are aspects of my contribution to it that I'm not happy with, and one that I'm really, really unhappy with. That seemed great at the time, but I laid any faults at my door there, not Ed's. I also seem to recall I wore a shirt that I wore quite a lot at that time, that I think I wore so much that it I remember putting it on once and its sleeve coming off. It frayed away. Shame. And that had been a Christmas present for my then wife. I liked that shirt. I get sentimental about everything. I miss that shirt. It was a good shirt. That. Oh well, gone now. At least I wore it until it dropped. Anyway, Resurrection of the Daleks. I'm watching the 2-parter of Resurrection of the Daleks, because that is how it was broadcast. I thought, just as I was about to set this up, oh God, I'm going to have to plug in the DVD player and this sort of thing, because I want to watch the 2-part version. But BritBox has the 2-part version as broadcast. Well done, BritBox. I do have the DVD, the original edition and the special edition. So, but I'm watching it as it was broadcast. So I first saw this all in one day. Did I? Yeah, I think I did, because our local vicar, videoed Doctor Who for us, and I went to watch it at his on a Sunday, because we didn't have a video, and it was what we did of our Sundays, was for me to catch up on the Doctor Who I was missing, because I was packed away to the local school. It wasn't far away, but it was one where I had to sleep over during the week, because my mum was at work, and she got up from too early to go to work and came back too late from work for me to be able to do normal school hours. So, oh, woe is me. So, but I got to see. So I watched this one Sunday afternoon like a kind of movie, and especially because it was already, chopped together, because it was, episodes 1 and 2 became episode 1, and episodes 3 and 4 became episode 2. So it was a 2-parter as a throw forward to what later happened, because obviously this and this always does feel slightly more epic. I mean, its content gives it that as well, but the fact that that's how I consumed it made it feel a bit. It is anomalous, because it's 2 feature-length episodes. It was only because of accident of scheduling, but nonetheless, that's how it always has kind of felt to me. And I have had it in various iterations since. I did then get it as a 4-parter on a bootleg, and episode 3 was the one with no incidental music on it, or incomplete sound effects and stuff like that. So I've had various bits and bobs of it, but this to me is this is the version I watched as a kid. I probably watched it more since, because I had it on video. I had the VHS as well, in 4-episode form, and that seems to now be the default for everybody, because that's how it was made, of course. But I am watching the version that was broadcast on BBC television and so the original iteration of Resurrection of the Daleks, and that's how I think I've instructed Ed to do it. If I get to the end of this, and he goes, right, episode 1, I go of 4, and I go, oh no, but I'm sure it's a long time ago since he did this, but I'm sure that's what we'd agreed. I'm slightly kicking myself for that now because I've just done a new series episode, which are 50 minutes, and I've got scheduled next some new series episodes, and I was looking forward to doing this because, in terms of content production, if one podcast only requires 25 minutes of commentary, that's less work for me to do than a podcast that, where one episode is 50 minutes of commentary. But that's my problem. So that click is me flicking through the menu on BritBox to get to 8th of February 1984. It says 46 minutes, Resurrection of the Daleks. Davros is held captive aboard a prison in space, but the Daleks launch a rescue attempt. Oh, there's so much to say about this violent Dalek-y Doctor Who bloodbath that we are going to press play on in 3, 2, 1. So here we go. Resurrection of the Daleks. This story became a guilty pleasure of mine for a while. I actually don't agree with guilty pleasures now. Why should you worry that you like something because of the disapproval of some imagined external commentators? If I like something, I like it. And you can like something whilst it not necessarily being good in inverted commas. Not that I don't think this isn't good. Although I think this has problems, but I forgive it for most of them because it does lots of things that I like, but they are things I might like as a sort of guilty pleasure. I maybe like some of this without necessarily approving of it. I love this opening shot, and I remember this feeling so... Although, funny enough, when I revisited this as an older person, I remember, coming into it thinking it would be this great gritty thing, and then seeing some of the flaws in the sort of grittiness, that they're not executed perhaps as well as I'd remembered, or just because they're in a program that is suitable for children. It's not it's not going to be The Wild Bunch or Aliens or whatever. But this is about as close as you get. That's Winston from EastEnders. Winston, the market stall holder, is one of the escaping prisoners. I always like Winston and Brig Ron, especially when they got a line, because they were extras who would occasionally have a bit of the limelight. I think I love this. It's very Doctor Who-y thing of the escape convicts are all, I think, in reject or standby Doctor Who costumes. And I remember my brother watching this and going, they're just single shots or whatever. But actually, that doesn't look like that there. And I know that the tramp gets in some stick for the way that he dies there. But that's an horrific idea. You open on what you think is a sort of, just an ordinary Joe who's going to observe something and go, "Oh, on my oath," and run away or whatever. But instead, he sees some policemen gun down a load of people escaping from a warehouse, and then they turn and shoot him. I mean, that's grim and gruesome, and as a kid, I absolutely loved it. I don't think it's particularly unsuitable for children. I think it's pretty close to the line. It's tame by today's standard. That's not a bad shot of the spaceship as well, and it moves. It moves without that sort of judderiness of some of the 70s spaceships. There's a slight slowdown here, isn't there, where... I think a boom was going to go into boom went into shot. So I think on their exit, the movement slows down, because a boom went into shot. But that's because it's very ambitious. I love the way they have to duck to go through the door, because it's not their spaceship. It's a Dalek spaceship. So they're too tall for it. That was Maurice Colburn as Lytton and Roger Davenport as Trooper. I always feel sorry for Roger because he actually gets quite a lot to do. He's sort of Lytton's second in command, but he doesn't get a name. Now, I would have sort of said, can I not be called, Klein or something. Why did I think? Oh, 'cause that's what Colburn's called in Gangsters. And I love the fact that these costumes are all a bit dirty. You know, they've given some thought to that. There's the change between film and video isn't too stark here because the colours are sort of beige and muted still. The shadows are lovely here. Matthew Robinson shoots all this very well. He is the right director for this. I think this is his first Doctor Who, and he's the brother of Tom Robinson, isn't he? Who sang "Sing If You're Glad to Be Gay." And then later went on to be the producer of Biker Grove. I've never met... He lived in Cambodia for ages, I think, Matthew Robinson. He's one of the few sort of key Who people I've not had the pleasure of meeting or interviewing, but he's on his DVDs, so, you know, I'm always feel less of a sort of need to mop somebody up if they've already contributed elsewhere. I like to think of myself as sort of grabbing the people that we've not had sometimes. And of course, Galloway is called Galloway. That's a nod to Death to the Daleks. You know, Eric Saywood was not afraid of nodding back to past glories. So we have Galloway here, and we have Styles later. A rodent instead of saying a rat or a mouse is quite a Saywoodism, where people say an unnecessarily not florid is the wrong word. He's trying to make. I don't think that shot quite works either. The close up of William Slay, it doesn't quite work. It's an odd. It's a moment of the direction that I think is slightly fluffed, which is a shame because as I say, I think Robinson's direction is very good. William Slay is an excellent actor, National Theatre actor. I've had the pleasure of meeting William a couple of times, and he's a very nice guy. Wonderful voice, very tall, great presence. He'd kept his letter that he'd got from Matthew or from John Nathan Turner, I think, saying, you know, well done, nice one. This is a nice shot of Lytton as well over his. See, that's not a trooper, is it? That's a second in command, or. At least an ADC, you know, ADC. Great. Maurice Colburn is absolutely fantastic, and nice red lighting on his face there. I'd absolutely loved him from Day of the Triffids, where he was the character who had a bit of sort of righteous fury, Jack Coker. So that's what I knew him from, because I was too young to remember Gangsters, I think, which is a series and of course he then went on to be in Howard's Way, which was a huge success, but sadly he passed away while he was making it. Otherwise it'd have been a massive. Well, I mean, he was a well-known TV face. Here's Rula Lenska with her marvelous hair all bunched up. I mean, she's got such lustrous, long, beautiful hair, Rula. But I think she's great in this. She speaks Saywood's sort of terse language. With the requisite bite, and I actually like this. I think Eric Saywood often wants to be Robert Holmes or Douglas Adams and isn't as good as either. But I do and I think the things that he realizes that he likes are things that I like, sort of cynical characters. That, you know, the thing here with the ship door not opening and Styles being a bit pissed off, and you know, Mercer who comes on the ship as the guy, you know, who's a bit of a sort of do-gooder, but he's a bit of a square, but he wants to do the right thing, and actually he ends up getting sort of busted by the captain, who is a great character who we don't actually see, which I rather like as well, and I don't mind Saywood's sort of snarky, cynical characters, because that to me as a kid seemed very, very grown up, and it buys you sort of grown up points without having to do, you know, violence or swearing or any of those sorts of things. So I kind of liked all that, and I still like it. I understand people who don't like it, who prefer their Doctor Who to be a bit more fantastical and a bit more sparky and a bit more fun. I totally get that, but I did find a lot of this era as a kid quite beige, you know, lots of wandering through, you know, spaceships talking about science or whatever. And to me, you know, soldiers and guns and fighting and people dying and, you know, people being grim and futuristic, all was all very much what I, as a 10-year-old Doctor Who fan wanted my show to be. People have complained that they pull up in a van, the military, but if they wanted to go there incognito, I don't see why that's an issue. People, there's another bit later on that I remember my brother sort of guffawing at, and me just going, why has that even entered your sphere of reference and taken you out of the story? I love the fact that these guys are smoking. That made me feel very grown up. Very rare occasions of people smoking in Doctor Who, and this is one of them. This is Sneh Gupta, who I didn't interview in Casting Far and Wide, and because of that, when I was doing Who's Round, I wanted to get somebody that I didn't have a contact for, and I was very proud of the fact that Sneh, who I think had showed an interest in Casting Far and Wide but lives in India, she'd agreed to do it, and we did it by Skype. I've since met her, and she's great. She's absolutely beautiful. She was a sort of TV face at the time. I think she did some episodes of Blankety Blank. She was somebody who appeared as herself. She was being sort of groomed for becoming a face at a time when, multicultural faces started to sort of be proactively sought, and rightly so, because the TV landscape was, so one colour, as it were, and this Matthew Robinson's decision to cast a very multi-racial crew of the spaceship, because it's the future. I mean, that that has become a sort of cliched shorthand to an optimistic view of the future, where color is not a bar, and we are you have people in key positions who are played by actors of color and all of that sort of thing. But at the time, this was a little bit different, and I actually like. I also like. And I think he's taken his cue from Alien, Eric Saywood there, and Robinson as well. That that you're not always manning the thing and entering warp drive and doing this. Sometimes, like you do at work, you're sitting around having a fag, waiting for something to happen. And I like all of that, and the lighting in this ship is excellent. So I think this feels like Doctor Who that can sometimes be a bit sparkly or a bit tinsely, or can sometimes be a bit sort of beige and ponderous, is doing sort of this is what they wanted Warriors of the Deep to look like. It doesn't, because it's white and bright. This looks absolutely terrific. I'm loving the lighting here, and this is also fantastic that we've got we're hearing from a very small number of people, and the kind of ship is being taken over via noises off. She's being told what's happening for engineering. He's about to tell us that we're defensive, and he's right back at the back of the set and has come forward, and the camera's come through the two people that we're favouring at the front. I always think that's a bit of a mimsy laser. They're acting their socks off here. The lighting's doing loads of work. Everyone's throwing themselves about, and there's two little sort of pencil thin laser beams that don't seem to be doing any damage to the model. It's that's just the restrictions of the time, but it's odd that the fancy bit, the laser beam, is doing less work than the actors. But that's Doctor Who. I know people don't like lines like "your bile would be better directed against the enemy Doctor." I mean, when I say it out loud, there it is a very bad line. But and Jim Findlay, who's an actor, he was up for the role of the monk in the head monk in Tooth and Claw. He told me, because he does a bit of he does a bit of those martial arts. Jim, nice guy. I interviewed him for Casting Far and Wide, and he's one of those actors that just kept going. But he's in Cry Freedom, isn't he? He's had a really interesting career. And I was actually quite pleased that when we went to do the interview, he knew who I was, because he's a bit like me. He'll read names in the Radio Times and stuff, and so he knew that I'd written and been in radio plays. So it was then really annoying, because at the end of on camera, he then goes, where we go, and he says, and he's means to go Toby, and he goes Terry, and then goes Toby, and so it looks like he doesn't even know what I'm called, and actually, which is fine, because why should he? But the truth is that he actually not only knew what I was called, he sort of knew my work and everything else like that, but it doesn't look like that in the film. And that's always really bothered me, even though it's only a thing that I would notice, and perhaps somebody who wanted to do me down and would go, see, he's called Terry, no, but I like the bit of smoke on the when the model docks, just a little piece of attention to detail like that. I like this, where people sort of have to. It's a botched. You can only do. It's obvious that these guys are having to do the heavy lifting here, and it's not making the right noise. But I like all of that stuff where futuristic technology needs a kick, needs a helping hand. It's not all slick, and like our technology today, it may be stuff that to people in the 70s it would have looked slick and space age, but we still have to switch things off and on again, or unplug them or recalibrate them. Or I think even the most marvelous and most modern things don't quite work, need a bit of a hand. Admire the way that Mark Strickson is always looking behind him furtively, which is wonderful because it adds to the tension and it gives him something to do in scenes where he hasn't got any lines. But it also means he knows where the camera is and he's getting his face in shot every time. I think Turlough is a great character. I think having the companion trying to kill the Doctor is a really neat and smart idea. I mean, it did end up causing them a few problems and restrictions in what they could do with him, but I think Strickson was excellent casting. I think Turlough being this slightly shifty character, whose moral compass is not necessarily always pointing in the same direction as the Doctor's, is really good. Now, this guy who gets a line here, he says okay or whatever. I managed to find it. Ben Cook was looking to track some of these actors down when he was doing an article to tie in with It's a Sin, because even though the It's a Sin main character was sort of based on Dursley McClendon, they liked the aesthetic of this Dalek story for when they were doing their recreation of a Doctor Who story that he could have been in. And so those costumes were reproduced and everything. So I actually helped Ben. He said, "Do you know where any of these extras are?" And this guy's a travel writer now, this guy that's just been killed. And I was quite pleased that I actually did go, I think it's this guy. And Ben got in touch and spoke to him. So that was an article written by somebody else that has nothing to do with me, but I just had a little hand in. And I like the fact that that there are little bits. My DNA is can be traced. Well, it can be now because I've said it out loud. But on things that weren't necessarily things that were my projects or I actually had anything really to do with. But apart from giving a little bit of a helping hand. But the contents of the article and everything was still a total surprise to me when I got it, because I was, as I say, it was just pointing Ben in a certain direction. And to the extent that I actually can't even remember that guy's name, but I did at the time. I think I identified him for Ben, and maybe one of the others as well. A while ago now, but because that's something that would just happen in an afternoon, and then I'd forget about it and only remember when doing something like this, and wanting to go. I've done things, What do we think about Rodney Bewes'? I mean, I think Rodney Bewes is interesting casting. They approached Mel Smith, interestingly enough, who I think would have been a really interesting. That's interesting. I've said twice. I think Bewes is a bold choice. I always found him a slightly strange actor because he has that slightly sort of hollow, flat delivery that is part of his speech pattern. It's not wooden acting, but it does give his performances a certain sort of flatness and tone. And I think the stutter is an interesting addition and helps him then convey the sort of conflicted nature of it. Well, early on it's supposed to suggest that he's a bit nervous, and then later on it helps him suggest his inner conflict. But it's a hard thing to do. I have not normally when I'm performing, although I can. I'm probably flattering myself. I go when I'm performing. My diction is absolutely flawless, but I'm better than I was. I've had to teach myself to speak a bit because I had bad R's and I love this is really gruesome. This and it's never quite explained what this is, but they release this gas that makes people's faces melt. And again, it's just a real thing. Watching that as a kid, you're going, "Oh, this isn't that thing with slow lumbering monsters from pantomime sea monster from 3 weeks ago where people died and didn't bleed and stuff. This is absolutely grim." And I like the fact that these two go off and have their mission. And John Adam Baker, he I remember him cropping up in an episode of The Bill, and I think a couple of mates of mine have tracked him down and chatted to him. So everyone's and he was somebody that I think we would have gone for with the casting far and wide had we not got the 5 that we got. But yes, so I can be known to stammer as well, but generally not when I'm performing. But I think it's a hard thing to pretend to do, and I'm not sure that Rodney Bewes is great at pretending to stammer. And I do think he is perhaps. I think he is perhaps the weakest performance in it. Even though I can see why they cast him, and he's a good name to be casting. I'm also maybe coloured by the fact that when I interviewed everybody for Casting Far and Wide, everyone went, all the actors were nice, but Rodney Bewes wasn't. And I've had a couple of friends who've met him who said he was perfectly affable, but I also know, I know a few people who had stories where they found him to be not pleasant. An actor that was a very good friend of mine, worked with him on a play, and who said that, on the first day went up and talked to him because they both, I think, had bicycles, and Rodney Bewes just sort of looked at him and walked away. And then a bit later he came up to him and said, yes, I'm sorry about before, but I don't do small talk. And my friend was just like, well, sod you then. So yeah, maybe my view of Bewes is coloured by the fact that, and another actor that I know who that I worked with, I had great respect for. I remember once going, this business, most people in this business are great, but and then he listed 3 people, one of whom was Rodney Bewes, and then he called them a word that I can't say before the watershed. And I thought, well, if so and so doesn't like you, then because he's a good guy, he's a good guy, and wears his status as I think a national treasure pretty lightly. But he didn't like Bewes. He didn't like Peter Bowles, and he didn't like one other person. Can't remember who it was. His diction is, whereas Del Henney, I think, is wonderful. And in fact, Del said that Rodney Bewes had come up to him and said, are you going to play it like that? And Del could get a bit snarky about things, but Del was actually a very nervous and a very humble man for an actor who has, I think, great control and a propensity to do very good understated menace. What I like about his Colonel is that, because Del was working class background, he was a Scouser from a working class area of Liverpool, is that he doesn't try and play it posh. I mean, he does the sort of RP, but I think a lesser actor would stand upright and make him stiffer, whereas actually a lot of those genuinely up and class colonels would roll their sleeves up and have their hands in the pockets because they wear their status sort of lightly and casually. I love this. I think it's really grim. The fact that he's got fingers melted. And again, they don't really sort of bother explaining what that is. It's this sort of gas booby trap thing. And the fact that she has to kill her mate is really... And then, she's... I remember my brother watching this and sort of saying, oh, why is she not doing anything? But I think, it's to stage it, to give it a bit of climax. She shoots the first one, but then she realizes she's outnumbered and she kind of bottles it like you would in a dream. Or, I think... Now, when I got the version... the first bootleg version I got on video, maybe from Australia, or maybe it had been put together, this was the cliffhanger. This was where it went to the end of episode 1. Release Davros. Whereas, and I like that mask. Did Michael Wisher say it looked like a frustrated Ina Sharples? But I like it. I like the black lips. And I love, in fact, I love all these actors. Called Philip McGough was in loads of things. Sergeant Calder. We tried to get him for Casting Far and Wide because he was in Doctors at the time, but I think he was leaving Doctors that week. I was really disappointed not to get Philip McGough, and I think every time somebody's tried to interview him, he's demurred. Sergeant Calder, and again, I like him as well because they're not playing soldiers. They convince me as soldiers, but they're not doing, he hasn't done I'm a gruff sergeant, and I like the fact that they've sort of augmented their costumes a little bit. So he's turned a bit of wepping into a sort of kerchief, which means that then when we get the the false versions later, they've got rid of those sort of personal touches to the costumes, and I quite like that. So the Dalek appearing is, of course, the end of the actual episode 1, which was, so I saw that for the first time when the first DVD came out, which came in a rubber case. I still have that. I think I still have the rubber case, even though I've taken it off because my display has to have the display, although it's been replaced by the special the special edition. Now that Dalek, if you look close, is a bit knackered when it goes out the window, but I didn't notice that the first time. Oh, and I think there was a picture of Davison in the alleyway here in the Radio Times in the back pages, I think there was. But that that pushing the Dalek out and the explosion, that's a great bit of Doctor Who. So I really like Del Henney and Philip McGough as soldiers in this, because they're not doing soldier acting, but I still believe in them as soldiers, because I've met soldiers who are sort of like that. I have equally met soldiers who are stiff and bolt and upright and that, but either approach is legitimate. I think the more traditional approach, the latter approach, is the one that we are more used to in Doctor Who, which is why I find McGough and Henney very refreshing. And McGough was also in Monocled Mutineer, in which he's the guy that's tracking down Paul McGann, and he was in Brookside as Alan Rothwell's heroin addict supplier, facilitator, mate. So Philip McGough was on telly quite a lot at this time, and I've since seen him pop up, saw him in an episode of Ultimate Force where he'd got like 2 lines, and I was like, what's happened to Philip McGough? And then he was a regular in Doctors, and so you go, so he's up. I mean, that Casting Far and Wide documentary, he would have been perfect for that, because it sort of shows the ups and downs. And I think Del said does he make furniture or something? He does have another business outside of being an actor as well. He's an actor that I really like, but he's maybe one on my list of ones that got away, because I've never quite been able to speak to him, which is a shame, because he's certainly, I would say, one of those faces. And he's brilliant in an episode of Nightingales, which is a sitcom I like a lot. I love the grim mute. This is as close as you can get for Saturday Tea Time. Now, I suppose the suggestion is that even though Turlough can smell it, it's dissipated enough because he doesn't die, I guess. But again, the viewer who wanted to sort of be on the lookout for things would go, well, why isn't it sort of melted bits of Turlough's face, and why does having a handkerchief save him? So here is Davros. I used to be very cross that Michael Wisher had missed out on playing Davros, because I love Michael Wisher's Davros. But actually, I think Terry Malloy's Davros is superb as well. They're slightly different versions of the same character, but I like Terry's sort of calculating, sort of occasionally purred, whispered characterization. I like the way Philip McGough says he's dead as well. He's quite avuncular. He's sort of pragmatic. He's straightforward, but he doesn't over dramatize it. I think they're on the same wavelength here, Del Henney and Philip McGough. I believe them as part of the same unit. I really like these army scenes. They sort of feel, even though they've got Chloe Ashcroft, who I'm afraid, and it's terrible because as an actor, you don't want people to sort of dismiss you because they know you from something else. But Chloe Ashcroft, who has that particular way of saying things as well, she says ambulance. She has got the voice of a children's TV presenter, or maybe I think it's the voice of a children's TV presenter because she was a children's TV presenter, because she was a regular on Play School, playing with Hamble and I mean some fine actors who've had great dramatic pedigree have done stuff on Play School. Wasn't Colin Jevons a Play School presenter? And Derek Griffiths was a Play School presenter and is a marvelous actor, both straight and comic. But I think it's Chloe Ashcroft's voice, and because her diction reminds me so much of the stuff that she did on Play School, that I can never quite believe in Professor Laird as a character. She's the woman from Play School, especially as she has to say later ambulance, or she already said it. But that's no reason not to cast somebody, and I'm sure that for a modern audience who don't have that that recognition, she's just an actress playing the part. And I love Del here. I think Colonel Archer has such a sort of warmth and an ease and a natural authority. And you know, that body language that he has, he's not doing that stiff backed thing. But you know, he's not had much screen time, Colonel Archer, but you really like him, and I like the fact that he gives his done to the Doctor, and he's kind of trusted him, and he has such a natural sort of innate authority that makes you feel warmly towards the character, because you go, yeah, he's smart. Of course he trusts the Doctor, because we know the Doctor's the hero, and he's smart enough to know the Doctor's the hero. And Mike Mungarvin is the other. He's smoking a fag, is the guy that's just chucked the fag away. Mike had played a Dalek in Destiny of the Daleks. He's not credited in this as this trooper. He's a non-speaking supporting artist, but he's a featured one because he's about to get attacked by the green Khalid mutant. And I think they make a great virtue of the Dalek. You know, it's making the Daleks, you know, really scary again. I mean, one wonders how they picked up the wreckage of the Daleks and didn't notice the sort of green mutating thing moving about inside it, but maybe they just all put a blanket round it and carried it up without looking. A glass of cool spring mountain water. I've used that with my tongue firmly in my cheek in a radio link once. I'm not wild about the guns. I can see what because the amount of shooting that there is, you can't be sort of matching up laser beams at different camera angles. They're really hard to do, and they'd have ended up looking shit because they would have had to have sort of come out at funny angles in order to hit the people in the right places. We've all seen examples of that in Doctor Who, but I think I don't know. I'm not wild about the lighting up and the sound effect isn't quite right for me. It is a part of the story that I remember when I watched it back as a sort of grown up, having been very excited by it as a kid. That it was one of the chinks in its armor, you know. I do like Sergeant. I love Sergeant Calder as well. I think Philip McGough's great. He's got a lovely sort of gentleness about him, and again, he's he's a sort of decent sort. And I like that shot as well. I wish he was lying at a slightly different angle from his gun. It looks like Mike Mungarvin and his gun have sort of both been laid down by a prop person because they're exactly parallel to each other and exactly straight. And I think it would just look slightly better if they were a bit more skew-if. So that's Mike Mungarvin, he gets a credit actually in Trial of a Time Lord as a duty officer, and he's credited in Destiny of the Daleks. But he's a regular supporting artiste, Mike Mungarvin, who did good work for Doctor Who late 70s and all through the early 80s. He's very haughty, isn't he? He's slightly more. He's a bit less clipped, Terry, and a bit more. Haughty and slightly full of himself, puffed up as Davros. But he's a great character, Davros. It's a good mask. I prefer the Wisher mask. I think the blasted out eyes are slightly more organic to the Wisher mask, which isn't quite as sort of ridged and masky. And I think the eye is more subtle on the Friedlander Wisher mask. But I still think the Davros is a great visual, and Terry Malloy gives a great characterization. And you know the Dalek-y man is a superb idea, and you know it gives an extra dimension to the Daleks. Davison's great at this. I mean, it is slightly awkward seeing the Doctor holding a gun. So this is the last we see of Colonel Archer as Colonel Archer. He's obviously about to be replaced, but this, and of course this is still episode 1. Even though it's episode 2, but watching this as it went out, we've still only met these characters this week, and I love this little wave that he does. That's a typical lovely Del touch of going, again, in real life, that's what somebody would do. In a fictional version, they would do a salute or stand up, but these are guys that he's seeing sort of semi-colleagues, and this is a real irony of going, it's dead. Well, and then we see the gun. So are you. And there's something about it being a silencer as well that is really, really grim. And they're going to shoot him in the head. It's really horrible. I will talk about Del, I'm sure. Del and I became friendly as a result of casting Far and Wide, where I was haunted by what we'd done in the documentary, because he revealed that he wasn't particularly happy with his lot. And I'd gone into it thinking, he was one of the biggest names in the cast, and he was still working, and he sort of revealed that he hadn't earned a living as an actor for 10 years, and he was actually selling flowers in Fulham. And he didn't wear it well either. He was a bit of a glass half empty person, Del, even though when you warmed him up, he was, he had a great pesky Scouse humour. He was a mixture of sort of very self-deprecating, but also occasionally quite sort of terse and downbeat as well. But then, as I say, had this sort of pesky sense of fun and was very empowering. He came to see Moths. He used to send me lovely emails about saying, when are you going to write your book about the profession, maestro? And he sent me a lovely email after Moths. And in fact, that made me pluck up the courage to go and see him, because I'd been worried that in the documentary, where Ed had left out of the edit that he did first, the bit where Del was really down about the end of his career, and I said, no, we've got to put that in. He said it, he wanted to say it, and this is a documentary about the ups and downs of being an actor. So Ed then put it back in, and we recorded another link to sort of emphasize that point. And then, of course, it came out, and a lot of people said, God, Del Henty cuts quite a sad figure. I thought, God, and that's my fault, really, because he needn't have done, because nobody would have known that wouldn't have been there. So triumphant. I mean, I think I prefer Wisher's shouting, because it is a bit more clipped and electronic, and I sort of buy it as being part of the last vestige of the Dalek. The crossover between the human and the Dalek, because when Wisher shouts, it is a sort of it's like he's becoming a Dalek, whereas when Terry shouts, it's a bit more sort of megalomaniac shouting. He does it very well, but I think I rationalise it slightly more the way that Wisher does it. The way that Wisher does it, he is the sort of missing link between man and Dalek, whereas when Terry rants, it's not like a Dalek. It's like a shouting megalomaniac. Does that make sense? And I'm only saying that because I'm trying to think why. Because I love Terry Malloy's Davros, but I love it more now than I did then. But I think that was only partially because my mindset then was, if it's old, it's good. So therefore, obviously, the Davros that was Davros before I was born is going to be the best Davros. And I think Michael Wisher is absolutely amazing. But Michael Wisher can be absolutely amazing, and that take nothing away from Terry Malloy, who I think is cunning and menacing and arrogant, and really his Davros, that is. And I think it's an excellent characterization, especially if you know Terry, who is an avuncular, charming, jolly, slightly silly chap. And of course, we have Leslie Grantham here as Kiston. He gets no credit on this episode, because this episode has the closing credits for episode 1, because most of the characters are in episode 1, so you'd have lost the credits for Sneh Gupta and John Adam Baker and those guys, and William Slay, if you'd had the closing credits for episode 2. So they put the closing credits for episode 1 on the end of this episode, which means that Les Grantham does not get a credit, but he goes on to be... It's an odd scream he gives there as well. It's not as bad as Chubbs in Robots of Death. But Les Grantham, has just... he has a Doctor Who link because he'd been in prison. This is well known. He'd been in prison for murder. He'd served his time. He'd been in the army, and he'd shot a German taxi driver, the circumstances of which I still don't quite understand. But he'd served quite a stretch, but whilst in prison had showed an aptitude for drama, and had drama lessons with the help of Louise Jameson and Pamela Salem, Rachel from Remembrance of Daleks, Toos from the Robots of Death, and I think they both then helped him get some sort of rehabilitation when he came out and get away into the acting profession. And I think he was offered Galloway or Kiston, and sensibly realised that you get more episodes if fewer lines as Kiston. I love this. This is, it's all a cliche. The cat, and the quiet. Oh, what's happening? Where is it? Something under the. But that's cliches are there for a reason, and Doctor Who Doctor Who does, they're cliches from other things, and I mean that's you can see that that's very powerful, isn't it? But you're also being asked to go, yeah, but it's not making any holes in the blankets. But actually just the fact that the blanket is moving about under the barrages is enough. It's a Doctor Who version of machine gun fire, and I think it's pretty harsh, even though if you wanted to look at it critically, you could. I like the way Davison sort of passes the gun over as though he doesn't really like holding it, but he was kind of enjoying holding it before, and he shoots into that blanket without much problem. It's very much he doesn't resist the Saywoodisms, although which pulls me in a couple of different directions, because as I say, I quite like the sort of macho-y stuff. It makes my show that I was watching as a kid, and I'm moving into teenage times, and being not wanting to be seen as a kid. Well, if my program I've loved since I was a kid is being all a bit grown up, then that makes me feel grown up. I still have that. I still have that feeling, but I also completely understand those who say the Doctor wielding a gun and all the sort of macho-y dialogue in this is a bit, it's misunderstanding what the charm of Doctor Who is. For me, though, the charm of Doctor Who is that you can have a story, set in a village with eccentric war game reenactors and a big face in a church one week, and then a story set on a future Earth colony where people get sucked under the ground the next week, and then the week after that you can have with giant woodlices sucking people underground, and the next week you can have a sort of grim and gritty thing about mercenaries helping Daleks replace people with duplicates. I mean, there's a lot going on, isn't there, in this story? I mean, there's, for a story that's essentially an action adventure, that's really all about I'm not sure that's the best bit of Resurrection of the Daleks, and I think Leslie Grantham's great, and he's got a great face, and he's good, he's good supporting villainy, but I think his equally humane in Your Revenge is a little bit it's a little bit well enunciated and enjoyed for a character that's just supposed to be this sort of taken over technician type. I think Rula Lenska's great in this. She her character she gets annoyed with Mercer, who is a bit of a dick, and that's and I think Jim Findlay sort of plays up to that, but he is probably the most. He's probably the most traditionally heroic character in it, really, but he is a bit of a dick. Which is an interesting dynamic, and I quite like the fact that Styles actually is slightly impatient with his Saywoodisms. I like the way Philip McGough does this as well. When she goes, "You're right," he goes, "Yep, stay there." I like all of that, and any bit where somebody does that bit with a gun makes me feel, whoa, that's what I want to do when I'm an actor. I want to do that with a gun. And again, this is, you kind of felt, and because McGough again was a sort of recognisable face, you're sort of going, they're not going to kill these guys off already, and of course, because we now know that these characters, come back as duplicates, so they're still in it. But it's pretty harsh that we meet these characters this episode, because it's only one episode, because they've been edited together, and both lovely Sergeant Calder and nice Colonel Archer, both dead by the end, which I think is a real shame. I'm never quite sure about Daleks saying exterminate a lot, but I know it's because you've got one camera and you can't move it, and your other cameras are somewhere else, and you've got to buy yourself a bit of time. But there we go. So here they go. So the duplication, but I mean that's a bit of a I can see why they've done it. Why they go, well, we've got to show that the duplicates aren't them. But if you're duplicating Philip McGough's Sergeant Calder, why have you duplicated him not wearing the augmentations that he's done to his costume. I suppose maybe because they based them. And actually, where have they got the design from? Because I mean, they've literally only just killed him. So how did they know to duplicate them? Have they duplicated them from Colonel Archer's brain print? Anyway, try not to think about it. But they've given Archer his gun back. They've taken off Calder's webbing and giving him a more traditional army costume, which is, of course, the clue for the other characters were the way that they're behaving. I mean, she's already said that's not Colonel Archer. So there's actually, there's no subterfuge here. It's more that you need Chloe Ashcroft and Janet Fielding to be held prisoner by somebody, so you may as well use the same actors. Because that helps with the storytelling and helps when you need to do a thing with a small cast. But Del's brilliant. Look, having been lovely, very nice, very easy, charismatic Colonel Archer, to now be cold, intense, and he could do cold, intense, even though he was actually quite a shy, as I say, self-deprecating, humble sort of fella. He also did have and I've since spoken to many people who knew him in his heyday, but note that he's credited above Maurice Colborne in this, and Maurice Colborne was a well-known actor at this stage. Del was well known. He's in Peckinpah's Straw Dogs. He's in Brannigan with John Wayne. He's in one of those films anyway. No, not with John Wayne. Anyway, let's not. You can look him up on IMDb. So here we go. This is the twist: is that lovely, sad Rodney Bewes, who has an earring, which I remember also thinking was quite cool because it's odd how it goes into slow-mo as well at the end. I thought for a while that the cliffhanger was the next bit where the Daleks come out and say exterminate before they get interrupted by Lytton, and that had been a contrived cliffhanger with the close-up of Davison having to be slowed down in order for them to have time to put the sting over it. But I'm sure on the 4-part version that remains the normal cliffhanger. So maybe I just made that up. And I can't remember if that Australian version I had that as the cliffhanger or not. I still think it had the one that we know. So there we go. It's my guilty. It's my guilty pleasure. I went through it, and it hadn't been. And then after I'd done that documentary with Ed, and because I'd got to know the 5 actors, Roger Davenport, William Slay, Del Henney, Jim Findlay, and Les Grantham. We went to see Les Grantham at the theatre in Birmingham, and he was he was all right. And David Warwick was in that as well as because he was doing Dad's Army. He was doing Dad's Army, the play, playing Private Walker, and it was just after he'd been back to EastEnders and then been fired because he'd been caught. Because he'd called Pauline Fowler a wanker on Zoom, basically. I don't think it was a precursor of Zoom, and I think done a bit of phone sex or whatever, sucked his finger at somebody and been rude about his co-stars, and so they decided, after years of resisting going back to EastEnders, had finally gone, all right, I'll go back, and probably thought, and I've chosen the right time and I'll stick around now, and then they got caught doing that and then got killed off for the second time. Having been really sort of killed off the first time. So it was already stretching credibility, and then they stretched credibility for such a short-term gain. It was one of those real sort of shame things that really didn't end up doing anybody any good. Weird to think that he's gone now. Good Lord. And Del sadly no longer with us. Oh, that was a shame. But we sort of stayed in touch, but we didn't meet up the last couple of times we'd wanted to meet up because Del had been quite poorly, and he lived in London, but he had a base in Cambridge as well, and I think he was spending more and more time there. Oh dear, I'm rather sad about that. I've gathered together a sort of tribute that I've written for him with, and I got messages from all sorts of people: Stephen Burkoff, Stephen Greif, who himself is no longer with us, Daniel Ryan, Neil Anthony, some really good people, and Dell's daughter Stella. And I still haven't quite put it together because it was time when you could write things, but nobody writes things anymore. We do it as podcasts now. Now, if I was doing that, I would have asked them all to record it into a voice, and I'd have just pieced it together and done it that way. But it's all written, which takes much more sort of doing. Anyway, that's something that I will do and put on my website or blog or somewhere. So, I mean, I've got to be really careful with this one because it's one that I have so many sort of personal ins with. I've got to be really careful not to just go, I'm going to choose these people, what I like. But what am I? Well, I think, and because this is 2 50-minute episodes, we're choosing 2 things from episode 1, 2 things from episode 2, and then a bonus thing. Now, normally I would have chosen 1 from the first 25 minutes and 1 from the second 25 minutes, but that's not the rule here because this is a feature-length episode. So I don't, Ed is not necessarily constrained to have to choose 1 thing from the original episode 1 and 1 thing from the original episode 2. So let me think. Well, I like the sort of the hard edge that it is given by that sort of confluence of Saward and Matthew Robinson, the melty faces, the guns with silencers, that opening scene of the guys getting gunned down, the fact that it's policemen. I mean, Saward seemed to me to be on a crusade to do all the sorts of things the show had either done in the past and got into trouble for, or not even been allowed to do. So you have, he knew that the show had got into trouble for auton policemen. So now you have policemen with silencers. There's something about a silencer that makes it somehow more deadly. I think it's because it's so sneaky, because you can go up to somebody and shoot them and get away with it. I remember the first time I saw a silencer and it was in a grown-up drama, and saying, what is that? And my brother's going, oh yeah, that's a silencer. And you sort of, you just go, and because it sort of takes away the bang and the kick and the noise, it seems so much more sort of cruel and deadly and sort of ninja-like, even though you are essentially still blowing somebody's head off or whatever. But because of the way that it issues the bullet and kills people sort of almost silently, makes it seem somehow, I don't know, crueler, sneakier, bloodier, more dangerous, more like a snake-like, it's like a viper that comes and bites you. Don't write in if vipers can't bite you. So, yeah, whatever that edge that Matthew Robinson and Eric Saward bring to it, I like, that was what really, really thrilled and excited me as a kid. And I think it's encapsulated by that opening scene. So if Ed chooses that, I'm having that. And the gloom and the atmosphere that Robinson gives it, I think is entirely in keeping with the hard edged nature of Saward's script, with its with those the hunt for the mutant and the gunfire and the sort of unrelenting body count. There's a continual body count, and that also involves sort of melting faces and all of that. So all of that, which goes against even what I in other moments I think is what Doctor Who is, which is a cheerful, zesty fantasy. The fact that this exists as something, and the fact that this and Earthshock were successful, I think then causes Doctor Who problems down the line, because then Saward tries to do that a lot, and you get to season 22, which I know turns a lot of people off. And I, as I say, I quite like season 22 for the reasons I'm outlining about this. But I know a lot of people who make a very good case for season 22 being, a low point in Doctor Who and the architect of its hiatus and eventual demise, because Saward was so interested in doing, Doctor Who's version of Peckinpah, and that was a misunderstanding of what the show is. And all those cases are made very, very, very convincingly to me. But I also like watching fake policemen gunning down people in a rainy London backstreet, and I like watching people's hands melt, and it because made the 10-year-olds of me feel totally grown up without actually corrupting me or scaring me or giving me psychological issues. So there's anything that makes me feel like I'm watching a grown-up show, even now at 49, going, I mean, I suppose it's doing. When I was 10, it was because I wanted to feel more grown up. Now that I'm 49, it's because maybe I need to excuse to myself the fact that I'm still watching something that was designed for children in 1984. Oh, phooey, I don't care. I am what I am. So that's number one. And number two. Oh, screw it. I'm gonna choose the army guy. I'm gonna choose Del Henney and Philip McGough. But I like the army guys. I like the fact that they don't play them as your cliched, "All right, sir, I'm the sergeant," and "Yes, hello, I'm Colonel Archer." That they bring them down and just make them much more believable. And as I say, the other approach is fine and works very, very well within Doctor Who. But these guys are so refreshing as a result and seem so much more real and so much more sort of reliable and sort of stoical and heroic in that way, but heroic in a more sort of understated and much more relatable and human and sort of down to earth sort of way, that it makes their deaths. I mean, I remember at the end of the episode sort of going, well, yeah, but you didn't see Sergeant Calder Dyson. Maybe I was kind of holding out that they might. You didn't see Colonel Archer die. He just had the gun held to his head. So because you can't really have killed them because they were great. They were really nice, and they actually don't have that much screen time either. So I love them. But there's all sorts of other things I could have chosen. I love the little subplot that Snake Gupta has. I love the fact that she has a fag. Although I think that they're trying to do that alien thing of making the spaceship, a bit knackered and everyone on it a bit pissed off because they're not people in space. They're people just doing a job. All of that, which is, again, this is Saywood's bringing that into it as well. So, he's sometimes, although he goes a bit too far with the violence and stuff, maybe doesn't quite understand how to work the Doctor into the stories. The motive behind some of that stuff, where you can see it's, where it comes from, where the inspiration from Alien and all that sort of thing. But working that into Doctor Who is perfectly acceptable and in fact laudable. And I like all of that and refreshing. And I think that's a much better approach to space. So all of that's great as well. So I could have chosen that. I could have chosen the scene where they look for the Dalek, which I rather like. There's plenty that I like about this, even though every single reservation that everybody has about this story, I totally understand. I know why people don't approve of pineapple on pizza. I used to work in an Italian restaurant, and when people used to ask for pineapple on pizza, or "Hello, can I have an Hawaiian?" No, why have I given them that accent? Because I'm a snob. But it was usually people with an accent like that who asked for a Hawaiian. I would go, "I'm sorry, madam, we are an Italian restaurant. We were a Cafe Uno. We weren't bloody, we weren't high end." And I would be totally snobby with anybody that asked for pineapple on pizza. And I really like pineapple on pizza. I like sweet and sour. And so, I can sort of get why people disapprove of something. I could even be snobbish about it myself. But if I'm perfectly honest with myself, some of the things that I might even disapprove of with one part of my brain, I absolutely gobble up with another part. So Resurrection of the Daleks is full of pineapple, and I love stuffing that hot pineapple in my mouth. Even though in polite company I would be terribly disapproving. That's a bit how I am about Resurrection of the Daleks. Although, as I say, I don't approve of the idea. I don't agree with the idea of a guilty pleasure. But what it's more, and I'm not saying that. I'm more saying I understand the people who find this objectionable. And they make perfectly. I don't know. I chat with somebody the other day actually on the phone, and it's about a piece of work that I'm working on. Who is somebody not of my political persuasion, who made a very strong case for Doctor Who as a sort of product of right wing ideology and an Edwardian adventurer whose Britishness is part of his core, and this is very much a Doctor Who is a he person because this person doesn't like the new series at all, and I loved listening to him. It's really intelligent, really forthright, really intellectual, knows his Doctor Who, but is also an academic and writer and brilliant opinion piece, right? A very intelligent man who said loads of things that I found hard to disagree with, even though in my heart I disagree with them, in my head and in his argument. And I was invigorated listening to this person saying loads of stuff that as I say, and he really doesn't like the new series at all, which I love, New Who. But the case that he made, I could sort of understand everything that he said in his case, and I really enjoyed hearing him make his case. It's an old-fashioned thing. I was listening to an opinion I didn't necessarily agree with, but I appreciated the opinion and how it was enunciated, and it was done so in a way with conviction and intelligence, and I completely loved listening to it and hearing it, and completely agreed with everything he said, except I don't agree with it. As I said, my part of my head absolutely took it all on board and went, yes, those are very sound points, but the other part of my head, which is attached to my heart, went, yeah, but this is what I like, and this is what I think. And although what A, B, C, D, and E that you said about the new series, I could see why all those arguments make sense, I still actually think D, E, F, G, H, and I instead. Or, I mean, I don't think that makes, but you know what I mean. Because I'm thinking with a part of my brain that is attached, that does more than sum up an intellectual argument, if you like, because so much of what I like about Doctor Who is indefinable, or is led by, not necessarily by logic. Perhaps that's it. When I was talking to this guy, it wasn't the Daleks and the Movellans, two creatures of logic at an impasse. It was a person of great logic and intellect talking to somebody who's a fluffy lovey, who's led by his heart and his tastes and the aesthetics. In that I can like something even if intellectually I don't or disapprove of it. I think it's really interesting. So yeah, I think Resurrection is very emblematic of that, how something can be really good and exciting Doctor Who, whilst also maybe perhaps not really being what Doctor Who should be or works best as, and yet it's a story I go back to time and time again. It's like my Sunday afternoon story. Like some films, a Sunday afternoon, Tremors, The Great Escape, Back to the Future. I think of there are certain stories that I like to watch on a Sunday afternoon to sort of exciting but cozy, thrilling, but not too taxing. And Resurrection is very much that. And it's one of the Doctor Who stories I've watched the most. It's also one that I would watch quite a lot when I came home, well-oiled after a gig. But again, that was particularly, I think, after I'd made the documentary with Ed, and I did have some guilt about Del, and I wanted to sort of watch it in order to kind of, I don't know, rationalise that, exorcise that, feel that, I don't know, whatever. But I certainly watched it a lot after we made that documentary. But as I say, all was well with Del in the end, and we ended up being, we go out drinking quite often, and he was always a bit shy, and it always took him a little time to. But I remember the sort of rosy-cheeked smile he got after he'd had a couple of bottles of Bombardier, and then the stories flowed, and he became quite the raconteur. But then at the end, he sort of, he put his anorak back on and shuffled off home. I'm very lucky to have known these people, but he was very much a contrast to the often sort of big characters, big, quite imposing, often quite scary characters he plays. He was a good actor. Right. What has Ed chosen? So I've chosen those two things. The military Del, Philip McGough, those characters, the feel of them, and the synthesis of Saward and Robinson that gives it this sort of dark, edgy, slightly violent, slightly cynical, but, it's got touches of Aliens, it's got touches of Peckinpah, it's got, where's is those influences, but they're influences that, feel like they're making Doctor Who go up a notch a little bit from something that can, that perhaps was a little pedestrian at the time, or a little sort of sciencey and thoughtfully, and going, actually, we can do action adventure, and we can do stuff that's a bit sort of tough and gritty and flinty, Let's see what Ed says.
So, Resurrection of the Daleks is 2 long episodes. I suppose it's probably more commonly these days watched in 4 episodes because it's watched on a DVD, but I watched it in its original form, the only form in which it's been broadcast on the BBC, which is in 2 episodes. And the first thing I'm going to talk about, which is a strange thing when you ask people to be positive about Doctor Who, because what I'm going to be positive about is the fact that it's also negative, that it's got such a doom-laden, grim atmosphere in it. But I really like that, and it's very much the kind of Doctor Who that I like to see. Not necessarily really miserable and doom-laden, but dark. And there's an atmosphere to it, particularly in the first 5 or 10 minutes. The desolate setting of Shad Thames, which would look nothing like that now. Actually, right now it probably would like that again because of the virus, but until this time last year it would have looked nothing like that. But the setting was absolutely perfect to create this kind of slightly tense and unpleasant atmosphere, which is not easy to do. It's even more difficult to do when you're in the studio, and I'll come to one of the reasons why that succeeds and one of my other reasons for liking the show. But the atmosphere meant that you felt always that the characters were in jeopardy. There was real jeopardy. And of course you hear the cloister bell, which I found very exciting as a child, because I hadn't heard it since I was very, very young. I mean, of course it was only 2 or 3 years since Legopolis, but when you're 12, 3 years is an awful long time. And so I remember that the cloister bell meant real trouble. There was certainly something about that era, and there still is, which resonates with me. And, you know, maybe it's because I'm not a great lover of sort of high fantasy, if you like. I don't really like that many sci-fi shows. There are lots of sci-fi shows from the 70s and 80s which I have desperately tried to get into but can't. You know, I can't watch UFO, I can't watch Space 1999, I can't watch the original Star Trek series. I did like Blake 7, but I'm not a huge sci-fi fan, and I'm much more into drama serials which have more of a sort of real life grounding, if you like. And so I think that was what Eric Sable was trying to do in his time, probably because he wasn't much of a science fiction fan. And of course there were some times when he was more successful than others than achieving it. And you know, we're supposed to be talking about the positive, so I won't talk about the plot of Resurrection of the Daleks, which definitely isn't its greatest strength. It doesn't have an inspiring or a hugely imaginative storyline, which I accept. But for me, Doctor Who was about 2 things. It was about how exciting and how imaginative and how much the story took you away to a world of the imagination, which it often did. But it was also a question of whether you could believe what you were watching. You know, Resurrection of the Daleks and many of the serials of this period, you could believe what you were watching, and you could believe that the Doctor was in trouble, and that was always important to me. I think Matthew Robinson, the director, was a big part of that. I wouldn't say he was one of the very best directors to have worked on the show, but he was certainly one of the better directors to work on the show. That was something that he perhaps brought to it. This whole sort of atmosphere gets better when the soldiers become androids later on, and you know, they don't become nasty, of course, because they're just robots. They just have jobs to do. But the way that it's played creates this kind of sort of faceless threat, I suppose. All roads seem to lead to disaster, and while that sounds like a strange positive thing to say, that's how I think Doctor Who should be. I think it's very difficult to believe that the Doctor's in any trouble if you don't have that, and I think far too often Doctor Who didn't, and Resurrection of the Daleks does, and that's why one of the reasons why I like it. So that's my first reason.
Well, I mean, I think I might get a point for that. I mean, if it's a photo finish, I don't think that'll get me over the line. So, you know, if the result is too close to call, I think I would probably have to maybe only give myself half a point. But if this is the only glimmer of hope I get, I'm going to give myself a whole one, because I think we were kind of getting to the same place about how, you know, this is in terms of the high stakes and the grimness, and I hesitate to use the word adult, but I think you know what I mean. And it's the same with gritty. You know, when we apply both of those things to Doctor Who, you know, context is everything, and they're not as as adult and as gritty as something that might have been on Channel 4 at 11 o'clock at night, where adult and gritty are two very different things. And although I fear, having invoked the soldiers as he did as well there, he might have wrapped both of my first episode choices into one. So that means maybe I do get a whole point, but that doesn't give me much hope for the rest. I suppose it's actually one where you could. I think it's sometimes lazy to do the cast. I would only ever do the cast in exceptional circumstances, and I actually think because I don't think it's 100% brilliant performances. I think some of the performances people are hard on are actually, I can see where they're coming from, and I'm sympathetic towards them. But no, it does mean that there are stronger performances and there are weaker performances. Whereas if I were to invoke the cast, I would want everybody to be really, really good. Which is why, again, I think I selected Del. But I also think Rula Lenska is really good. She does a lot with that character who never meets the Doctor, ridiculously, except for the photo call. But anyway, let's not get into that. But she is really good. She's got a real authority and a real, she's very good at the terse cynicism and the downbeat. She's on a suicide mission, and she does it with grim determination. And as I say, I like the way she is with Mercer. But anyway, I'm sure we'll talk about that. What is Ed's? But I was thinking, I wonder if Ed will choose the cast, but I'm not sure that he will, because I think there are weak links in it. And one of those is the main guest turn, which I feel sorry for Rodney Bewes saying it, because I think he could be an interesting performer, and I'm never averse to casting against type. I'm never averse to casting actors well known for comedy parts in straight parts in Doctor Who. I think that can actually help, because the dissonance there, you have a scary crack in the wall or a scary statue or a scary gas mask, having somebody well known for a sitcom suddenly doing scary space stuff can suddenly, it's the familiar in a different light. That's all part of the dissonance and the often strange, unsettling juxtaposition of the familiar and the scary, the comfortable, the familiar and the unfamiliar, the comfortable and the scary. The sitcom actor in Space Fatigues is all part of that. And when it works, I know William Gaunt is more than a sitcom actor, but he was, that's what he's well known to for most, sort of casual TV viewers. Clive Swift again. There's lots of examples of actors well known for their comedy work coming in and absolutely blowing it out of the water when they come to Doctor Who. I don't sadly feel, despite his best efforts, that Bewes does that. Anyway, second thing, Fred.
The second thing I like about it, and this could really apply to either of the two episodes, but I'm going to put it in part one, because there's more warehouse stuff in part one, and that is the set design, which I think is a very, very underrated factor in the success or failure of Doctor Who in the original run. Of course, not today, because it's inexcusable for anything not to look great in today's language in terms of set design. But in the old days, that was not the case. The serial is set, there's a reasonable amount of film material outdoors, but the serial is set largely in two places. And firstly, the warehouse absolutely looks like it is a warehouse. If you had taken the video cameras into those buildings in Shed Thames, I can absolutely believe that is what they would have looked like inside. And again, that was not always the case. And it just helps you create a real sense of place and an ability to suspend your disbelief in what you're watching. And I wasn't aware of that when I was a 12-year-old or 11-year-old when I watched it first time. But that's certainly something that strikes me now. The spaceship sets as well are, pretty competent. Certainly as good as you're ever going to get for Doctor Who on a futuristic set, which was very difficult for them to do on the money that they had. But I think that the Eternal White, which they used a few times on Doctor Who, this time as successfully as ever when they appear from the time corridor, for example, very simple and works very well. No fancy effect which they couldn't do. A very simple effect which is very effective. The set design is one of the important things which creates that sense of belief in what you're watching. Too often in Doctor Who it wasn't there. It's very much there in Resurrection of the Daleks. And, there might be the occasional bit of balsa wood flying around when there's an explosion, but that's, par for the course. So, yeah, set design, which I think is, as I say, a very important part of the original series of Doctor Who, and not recognised often enough as such, is my second positive about Resurrection of the Daleks.
Yes. I did mention that particularly when Rodney Bewes and William Slay went indoors after that first film sequence, and yes, the sympathetic sort of transition between outside and inside is a testament to the art direction, the production design, and obviously a lot of thought has gone into that. And as Ed says, not always in Doctor Who and indeed to television at that time is enough effort made to rationalise the interiors with the exteriors, and that is a very strong point. And I do think that warehouse set in particular is very good. And actually, I think about it, the low ceilings in the Dalek spaceships and stuff. I think it's because of the visuals. I don't like the sort of Dalek head guns. I think I could sort of see why somebody might think that was a good idea. In the same way that at the end of that documentary Ed and I make, we didn't have an ending, and I came up with this brilliant idea at the end and went, why don't I do this? And I did a sort of monologue, bringing all the strands together that by mentioning Genesis, Destiny, Resurrection, Revelation. And it seemed to me a great way of tying it all together, and it was brilliant because we were stuck for an idea. We had to do something there and then, had to do it in a couple of takes. We needed an end to the film, blah blah blah. So did it, brilliant, sorted that. And then a few reviews came out. I remember, I'm sure John Williams, who's a friend of mine, but he was a bit scathing. He said, I was waiting for you to say, and they all did it on the same planet, but not on the same day, whatever. And yeah, that link will be the death of me. Do you know what? It seemed when you're in something and you do something, seems like a good idea, and then, even the next day, I think it took me longer than the next day, but now I go, what was I thinking? That's awful, and I hate everything. And I think it's probably a really good documentary. But that hangs. No, it is a good documentary, and especially for the time that we had, and the reason that Ed did it like that was because of the budget and the time that we had, and it's right up my street because it's looking at the acting profession as a whole. I actually wish I'd got in armed with a bit better knowledge than I had in some places. I didn't ask Del about Fallen Hero, which was a big series that he did, which, and I've since discovered, I think he got a bit demanding on. Barry Stanton, his friend who was co-star on it, told me, and that led to the series not carrying on. But it was a big series that got Del actually quite a lot of attention, but it's largely forgotten now. It's quite an unlucky. He was quite an unlucky character in it. It's quite a grim show. But also Brannigan, I've just looked up Brannigan. Actually, it's John Wayne. Well, I drank with Del a few times and chatted. I never asked him about working with John Wayne. What an idiot! And didn't mention that. I mentioned the Peckinpah stuff in Del's interview, and I think I'd got him thinking that was going to take up so much of it because Straw Dogs was such a cause célèbre. And Del actually went, well, I didn't like Peckinpah that much, and that sort of slightly disarmed me. But that was sort of Del as well. Sort of slightly, instead of going, yes, I know, I was in the Peckinpah film, he kind of undercut it and was a bit half empty glass about it. And so that I remember that sort of putting me off slightly off my stride slightly. So yeah, there are things I would like to do differently about that documentary. But bear in mind, it was also only the second one that I'd done, and the first one was a sort of funny bit of frippery about robots of death. So, but it's about actors and about the acting profession. But I'm sure I'd do a better job now. But that's no reflection on Ed, who always makes good films. That's a reflection on me. But I still think for what it was and the time that it was and the budget that we had and what the documentary landscape was at the time, it's good. No, it's good. And I'm glad we did it, and it's a showcase for those 5 individuals, which I think is sound and good. But why was I saying that? Oh, because the Dalek hats, that they grab by the ice talk to take them off. I understand why they might come up with that and go, well, Dalek troopers should have hats that are a bit like Daleks, so that they're like sort of human Daleks sort of thing. I understand the rationalization behind that. And the guns have a certain continuity. The Dalek troopers' guns are the sort of long rifle versions of the spaceship people guns, which are the shorter ones, which basically have those lights at the end and those sound effects, because they are much easier to do than lasers. But that makes me a bit down on the design of the story, because I don't like the aesthetic of those things particularly. I don't think they ever quite worked, which means I probably lumped the set design in with all of that. But Ed talking about it there, no, it's more of the futuristic aesthetic is the bit that I don't really think works. But that's in terms of the sort of humanoid costuming, really. Whereas actually the design there is really strong. So apologies. Apologies up until today, where I've sort of, because as I say, when I was talking about that boom microphone that nearly came into shot, that's because partially because Maurice Colburn is ducking his head down, because they've kind of paid attention to the fact that a human might not just be able to stroll through a Dalek spaceship, and so again, and you can see the ceiling in places in the spaceship, and I think that is quite ambitious and quite visually bold, and an attempt to do something different. So yeah, the design is very good, and I've never perhaps paid it the heed that I should have done, because I was put off by the sort of the costuming side of things. So John Anderson, designer, please forgive me, because actually I think Ed is right. You've done a splendid job there, and it's to John Anderson's credit that the story has some of the atmosphere that he does. And he comes back, of course, for the first 4 parts of Trial of a Time Lord as well. So sorry, John Anderson, who I don't actually know anything about. I don't know if he's ever been interviewed. But I think the design of the warehouse and the low ceilings in the spaceship are to be hugely commended. So I'll take that, Ed, even though I didn't choose it. Well, this has been a long one, hasn't it? So I hope you enjoyed that. I will return for the second part of my guilty pleasure. There's no such thing. Next time. And in the meantime, if you didn't like this, well, your bile would be better be directed at other podcasts. No, that doesn't make sense. Oh, sorry, I'm off for a glass of cool spring mountain water. Ta-ta. Thanks very much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock, and my special guest, Ed Stradling, who you can find on Twitter or X as @EdStradling. And do check out some of the videos that he does when he's not copying old VHS tapes over and finding lost bits of continuity and all sorts of other TV-related ephemera. Gosh, he goes down particular rabbit holes, but I'm so glad that he does. I'm so glad too to have patrons who support these podcasts, and they include Ian Key, Joe Llewellyn, Ian K. McLachlan, Philip Marsh, Nathan Martin, Roland Moore, Kevin Murdoch, Graham Knott, Adam Parker, Barry Platt, Risto Matti Zorillo, Frank Shales, Andrew and Lisa, Catherine Armitage, John Arnold, Kevin Ashelford, Luke Adkins, James Bell, David Bickley, Will Brooks, Gary Byrne, Robin Bland, Robbie C, and Alex Kafajoglu. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork Dylan Patterson. If you would like to support these podcasts, please like and subscribe to them on iTunes. Spread the word on social media, but you can also go to patreon.com/Toby Haydock, where for as little as £3 a month, you can get advance releases, unique, bespoke, specially for you releases, monthly AMAs, and bonus material, and interaction, and a nice community to hang out and respond without the glare of social media and the inbuilt problems with that. So that's patreon.com/Toby Haydoke. It's £3 a month. You can get 10% off if you sign up for a year in one go, and you can pay more if you would like some of the things that lure you up to the higher tiers, but all the content is at £3 a month, and basically it's a pay what you can afford, what you fancy model. I understand that some people can afford and or fancy nothing, and that is completely understandable. But if you do want to do a one-off payment because you're feeling particularly flush, or I sound particularly hungry, or there's a podcast you've particularly enjoyed, you can go to kofi.com/Toby Haydoke, which doesn't tie you into any sort of monthly subscriptions or anything. But if you want to lend your support in ways other than the financial, you can go to iTunes or Spotify or anywhere where you get your podcasts and give these Toby Haydoke's Time Travels 5 stars and a few lines of review. That really does help separate these from the crowd, and it is a big crowd out there, and one that's full of lovely people doing lovely things. But obviously, for the purposes of this podcast, I would like you to, plug and spread the word about this as much as you can. As for social media, I'm on Twitter at Toby Haydoke. The podcasts have their own feed at Haydoke Podcasts. I'm on Instagram at toby.haydoke, and I have a Facebook fan page as well. So please do what you got to do in all of those areas. That would be lovely. It's interesting, isn't it? Ed there mentioned that Canary Wharf would look when he was recording that as it did in 1984, because Ed was recording his contribution during COVID, during lockdown. Haven't times changed? And yes, I still have quite a few in the can of people who were kind enough to give me their contribution whilst we were shut down. That's how these started. God, a different world. These were my answer to the impositions of lockdown, to try and be productive, to try and get something out there, and sort of to try and connect with people as well. I thought the Emily Cook's brilliant Twitter-a-thons were a great way, and Mikey's Quiz of Rassilon. I love the Quiz of Rassilon. Were great ways to show that the Doctor Who fan community could be creative and supportive, and this thing that holds us together and is and has been with many of us since childhood, which I think means it has an extra special sort of bonding element to it, because it was solace during childhood and gave us companionship during childhood. It now, I think, when we were in lockdown and isolated, we were able to spread our tentacles around the world and hold other people's tentacles. But it was a real positive. So I'm sorry, Ed, it's taken so long. They found a cure. But I reached out to a lot of people then, and I was hugely pleasantly surprised by the responses. And I'm slowly working through them whilst also trying to add new episodes. In fact, I've just recorded, haven't I? It's just been out Sleep No More. Well, when Ed that had been made, but when Ed recorded, I'm about to do Spyfall. That's right, I'm about to do Spyfall, and that hadn't been made or aired when Ed recorded this. His contribution, I shouldn't think. Isn't that extraordinary? Anyway, there we go. We've had another couple of doctors, although one of them's an old doctor, but you know what I mean. Anyway, how exciting. It was nice to hear Ed's voice. He's a good lad. Yeah, it's funny. We saw nobody during lockdown because we were locked up, but actually, a lot of people I know have sort of moved about and migrated, and of course, it's easy these days. You think you're in touch with people because you're friends on Facebook and Twitter, and they're just a quick typed message away. But it's not the same as sitting in the pub and arguing about the androids of Tara. The simple pleasures. I have to say, I was on the tram today, and there'd been a football match, and that sort of mob, mob singing that's quite intimidatory. That's quite, it's got lots of bravado. I didn't like it at all. I was having to drop something off in town and come back, and I was very, very glad to get home. And I thought, we're Doctor Who fans. We are a bit weird, but I think we're, I think the worst thing we can do, if there's a big bunch of us, is that there'd be slightly too many people on one tram who are prepared to be generous about the censor rights. That's about as extreme as anything gets when you've got a critical mass of Doctor Who fans. Anyway, I hope to see Ed again soon, and I hope to speak to you guys again soon.